Hello, I'm Eric Snodgrass, and thank you for watching this monthly in-depth ag forecast for Ag Carolina and Ag South. Now, we've made a couple of changes just to provide you with better content, and what we're going to be doing is at the end of each month, we're going to just release one video a month where we focus on all of the big picture things and all the longer content things. I think that'll be much more valuable to your operations, so we just made a slight shift. So hopefully you find this to be instructive and useful. So here's what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about drought. We're going to then walk through some of the interesting stuff going on in the tropics, look at some model discrepancies. I'm going to stretch you out over the next couple of weeks, which will get us halfway into the month of August. We'll get a good look at some of the longer term dominant factors for August, and then we'll look at fall and even into winter at the end of this forecast video. And the last thing I'm going to finish up with here, after we discuss the hurricane season and what I think the potential is of it, is I'm going to give you a deeper dive into South America, because they are 1 month away from starting to plant, and we have several crops grown in the Ag Carolina and Ag South territory that compete directly with what South America is up to. So all of that's ahead of us. Thank you for kind of just staying with us as we make these slight adjustments in the cadence of our videos. But what I want to start off with today's drought. So you've been staring at a map for a while here of the U.S. Drought Monitor. We've got 47% actually, of the land area in the lower 48 in some form of drought. And there's a couple things I want to point out to you here. That drought is not in the Corn Belt. We've only got 4% of our acreage in the Corn Belt and drought. There's 10% of the acreage in the Cotton Belt and drought. And the drought expansion's primarily been happening in the northwestern United States. And I need you to keep that in the back of your mind as we go forward. Zooming in on the southeast, all the way up to Virginia, clear down to Florida and over to Mississippi, or Alabama, excuse me. What's changed in the last week with the newest drought monitor, and a new one of these is going to come out on Thursday, but what's changed is we went from the previous week at almost 82% of the land area in some form of drought down to 63%. I think the newest drought monitor is going to drop that down even farther. And what's happened here is that we've just seen a lot of moisture. In the last 7 days alone, the Bermuda High, which has just been this dominant feature in the Atlantic, continues to pump moisture around. And we just saw multiple days of very heavy rainfall into this region. And because of that, we've broken this kind of systematic drought development that happened in early summer. And it appears now we're in midsummer, and we push toward late summer. The risk of drought redeveloping here is small. Where I think it's going to be high is going to be in the southern plains of the United States, into this side of the Cotton Belt. And I think that's going to be important to be watching the Mississippi as kind of a delineator. To the south and east, better chances of being wetter. To the south and west of that, better chances of being drier. Now, if we look at the main causes of where the pattern kind of got us to in July, I think it's going to boil down to three things, okay? First is this. It doesn't look like much, does it? But that is the anomalously stronger than normal flow around the Bermuda High. And that's going to be key to everything about our next 90 days, the hurricane season, right? We're at the precipice, the beginning of really the active time period for hurricanes, and the Bermuda High's position is critical to that. Piece number two, do you see this? These are stronger, what we call easterly wind bursts. And they've shown up at times. And when we talk about the development of a La Nina, it's all about getting stronger than normal trade winds going across this area. The third thing is actually right up here. These are some pretty subtle features, but that is the position of the Pacific High, which is partly split here and also partly split, especially in the second half of July, over the Pacific Northwest. Take a look at it. This is the jet stream level pattern. So the Pacific High's got a piece there and a piece here. There's our Bermuda High, and the flow has gone over the top of this ridge, south of that trough, over this ridge into this trough, and over this ridge, and the Bermuda Highs come around, pumping the moisture. See how that's all working together? Now, I bring this up because this is what July did, and there's pretty good evidence that August is going to do something similar. So if you're curious what my August forecast is in a nutshell, I see many pieces that we saw in July coming back. So that's kind of a big picture part of this. Now, if we look back over the last 30 days, what did July do? You can see that most of the dryness has now been limited to this part of West Virginia, Kentucky, the Ohio River Valley, at least the eastern side of it up into Pennsylvania. And outside of a few drier pockets, take a look at this part of South Carolina. We've had plenty of rainfall, locally extremely heavy rainfall. There are some pockets of drought still in the Delta, and this is where Hurricane Beryl came through earlier, but the farther back you go to the west, which of course isn't on this map, we've been drier too in that side of the Cotton Belt. But our biggest question about where this goes forward is that Bermuda High going to keep doing what it was doing? And is the Pacific high going to stay where it's been? So let's talk about this. I'm going to show you the European model. We're up about a mile in the atmosphere, and we're looking right here squarely at the Bermuda high. Now, a year ago, it was gone. It had left. It was on vacation in Europe. This year, it is right over Bermuda, well, at least a little bit to the, to the east of it here, but doing its normal thing, somewhere between Bermuda and the Azores. Now, watch this. As we play this through the remainder of this week into early August, the Bermuda high being in its position here means that if tropical systems show up, they're going to come around the edge of this. And by the time we get into Friday, we're going to watch this area carefully, coming off of the Lesser Antilles into this part of almost the Bahamas. We see that this weekend there's this low that's trying to curl up in through here. And we ask questions about the environment in which it's going to live, if it's going to be conducive for tropical development. Now watch. The European model is suggesting that something's going to show up here. And by this Saturday into Sunday, it could be moving along our southeast coast. Now, at that point, several other factors are going to determine how close this gets to the U.S. and how strong it's going to be. Like the Bermuda high moving in here. Will it help drag this out? Will a broader trough in the upper levels of the atmosphere setting up here over like the Hudson Bay help drive this system farther out? Or does it have a chance to get in over Florida and start to spread rainfall throughout the southeast, making it possibly through Georgia, North and South Carolina? That's all yet to be answered because this is still 7 days out for us. But the model's pretty clear that something's going to show up here. Now that's the European model. Can I take you back to the beginning of this and switch models on you? Let's go now to the GFS. The GFS has got a whole different look. And let's go back to the 6Z run so I can see the whole thing here. Watch this. Where's that little low? Well, this is Friday. It's here. It's farther to the south. Now, you don't see it really clearly, but watch. From Friday into Saturday and Sunday, it pushed whatever it was over Florida as a weak wave, but starts to develop it there and shoves it along the Gulf Coast, actually over into Texas, and doesn't bring it into the southeast. So the model differences on this are huge. But I'm showing you differences that are more than a week out, which means we can't trust these individual model run differences. What we do know is this. See if they've done an update on this since I brought up the map. Nope, this is the early Thursday morning update. The Climate Prediction Center has given this, the National Hurricane Center, has given this a 60% chance of developing. But they're keeping this whole corridor open for the risk. Most model guidance follows what the European is suggesting, which would take this system and develop it and keep it off of the southeast coast. But until we get out past this weekend to know how it develops over the Bahamas and what the wind profile looks like over much of the southeast, I cannot rule out the chance for this to get into the Gulf. I also can't rule out the chance that it comes closer to the southeast coast and dumps a bunch of rain. So we're going to watch that very, very carefully. Now, yesterday, as the sun was setting, we saw big storms once again moving through parts of the southeast, locally delivering heavy rainfall. You can see some of the issues the rest of the country was dealing with after the sunset. For us, we can see all the wildfire smoke. This is remnant smoke from wildfires that were in Canada, mixing with wildfire smoke from huge fires throughout the west. And in the middle, some huge storms putting down major hail in parts of the northern plains. But as we watch the overnight hours and get to this morning through middle of the day, we have some cloud cover over parts of Ag Carolina and Ag South Territory here, but most of our showers and storms are off the coast early today. But there's a corridor opening up in through here that's got some stronger storms, and some of the forecast models are suggesting we could work some of those storms into Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, even today here on the 30th. As we get into tomorrow, still chances of isolated storms. That would be the 31st. And then August 1st, we still have chances for storms in this area. And I want to get in there and have a good look at this. But before I do, we need to do a quick summary on July. It was a very busy month. 210 tornadoes nationally, 2,700 reports of severe winds, and nearly 500 reports of hail. And all that added up to this whole year is putting 2024 at second place behind 2011 in terms of severe storm reports. We're at nearly 1,500 reports of tornadoes. We're over 12,200 reports of severe wind and over 4,600 reports of hail. So given all of that, let's kind of zoom in here, picking this up midday here on Tuesday and watching where these storms could possibly be getting into the nighttime hours. So scattered, but the chance for them to be quite strong coming into this part of South Carolina. Overnight hours, we're going to reset. Storms offshore early tomorrow and Wednesday, But again, see how on Wednesday night the chances for storms coming out of the northwest could form in this part of North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Playing it forward into Thursday morning, again, another round, possibly sitting up closer to the shore on Thursday morning, but more storms coming out of the north and west. Most of these events are isolated. It's not that everybody's going to be getting a big drink out of this. But we have to question, how's the pattern setting up going into this first week of August with delivering rainfall? The artificial intelligence is saying keep the tropical system way out here to open ocean, keeping a corridor of storms open there, but it's not aggressively wet throughout much of the southeast. The National Blended Models show storms. This is that 30 to 50% chance of storms we typically get, but not overly wet like we had been. The risk that I'm starting to see is that if you're back in the Delta or over here, which we directly compete with crops in these areas, this is looking very dry and extremely hot. The WPC sees the same things. Better chances for storms in our area, but the farther west you go, the greater the drier risk is going to be. The European model out 10 days shows the tropical system staying close to the shore, maybe impacting coastal North and South Carolina. But outside of that, the farther west you go, the drier the risk is going to be. And the GFS, I took it way out there. This is all the way out to Sunday, August the 11th. It doesn't bring the tropical system here. Instead, it just leaves it floating around in the Gulf of Mexico, heading over toward Texas. So major model discrepancies. And what the GFS is doing is it's keeping whatever this tropical system becomes on the south side of another high pressure cell here, which would be competing with the Bermuda high sitting there. Can you see it? Instead of making the turn around the Bermuda high, it stays south of this high pressure cell, which is going to keep the heat on in this area and keep the flash drought scenario going. So let's distill all this down into a couple of maps. If we look at the best chance at who's going to be on the wetter side of average, you see that our chances for being over an inch of rain in the next 10 days is 50 to 90% across Ag South and Ag Carolina territory. You can see where those storms are coming from through the Midwest here. But on the drier side of this, let's go here, that's the best chance at staying under 1/10 of an inch. Very high probability of that in parts of the Mid-South, the Delta, into the southern plains of the United States. So we just need to think about this and how the pattern's evolving. And I'm going to take you to the upper levels of the atmosphere to see it a little bit better. Through the end of July and to start August, what do we see? Broader ridging setting up here with the flow coming around the top like that. So if there's flash drought risk, I think it is primarily to our west, maybe even west of the Mississippi River. That's through August 3rd, which is this Saturday. Getting into Sunday, Monday, and Tuesday of next week, the artificial intelligence develops the low here. So it keeps the tropical system out to open ocean, tries to bring it close to us by Friday, August 9th, but maybe the 7th, 8th, and 9th, getting it close. We'll keep an eye on that. We'll see how well the artificial intelligence does with this. But then beyond it, August 10th, 11th, and 12th, we get a deep trough over the Hudson Bay, flow coming in like this, which means this whole area stays very stormy. But to the south of it, we're looking at drier and hotter risks. So we need to talk about that again in a few moments. Bigger picture, though, into week 2. Take a look at what the European model's doing. It's trying to open some dryness into this area while the wetter conditions stay north around that deeper low that's forming over the Hudson Bay. It's keeping the tropical system out here. What we don't know as we work our way toward mid-August is, does something else develop here? Or does another system develop around the base of the big Bermuda high? All of that is a wild card going into the middle of the month, making this August forecast very challenging. But as it stands, the models all look like this for August 6th to August 13th. Drier conditions likely working into this area. What is not represented in these models are the daily convective storms when we get those 50% chance of storms just popping on the day's heat. I think the greatest risk for being drier is way back here, not necessarily over our area. Now, on the temperature side of things, before we stretch this out and look at the rest of the month of August, we've been hot for most of July. Temperatures have been quite warm, while the Midwest, the southern plains, have not seen long duration heat episodes. In fact, the heat that's in here now is pretty rare in the month of August. All the really hot stuff has been in the west. If we look at where this is going, though, today, as I'm recording, we've got excessive heat watches that are out and heat advisories that are out for parts of Georgia. But the greatest heat is in the Delta back into the southern plains here. High temperatures for today look something like this, but going into Wednesday and Thursday, we get into a lot of mid to upper 90s. We might crack 100 degrees in a couple of places. There's Friday into Saturday and Sunday. The wild card being by Sunday, where's that tropical system going to be? Is it going to be approaching Florida, maybe spreading some cloud cover over the region? Still, our temperatures are quite hot into this weekend. But if you watch the whole country, you notice that the anchor to all of the heat is likely going to stay in the Central Plains several days in a row. If we look at the total evaporation because of that, our numbers are not high. We're typical here, somewhere around 1 inch to 1.5 inches. That's normal for us in summer. But with all of that heat in the western corn belt, into the western cotton belt, into the southern plains, this is where we see the heat causing evaporation rates to get up above 2 inches, if there is water to evaporate. Day 5 through 10, that's when the trough drives in. Likely we stay to the south of it, meaning that we have warmer than average conditions that last out there till those first 10 days of the month of August. And day 10 through 15, we see that as well. But it's the contrast to the north that's going to be driving this wet corridor in this region. What I want to know is, does anything come around the Bermuda High or form in the Gulf of Mexico during that time frame to introduce moisture into the southeast in the form possibly of a tropical system? All of that is possible by the time we get to mid-August. But the European model sees something similar. Here's the next 5 days. There's day 5 through 10. See the cooling coming in the north? And day 10 through 15, just dropping that down. But by most indicators, we continue to finish July and start August with more warm conditions than cool. All right, that's just the next 2 weeks. Where do we take this? Well, I want to show you this map. It's global, but it's going to tell us some big things. One, let's start in the Pacific. The Pacific high stays split. See that? That's what it was in July. We see that more often. The Bermuda high is strong, but it's stronger on its northern side. You see the drop in pressure the models are forecasting here, the drop in pressure forecasted there. That indicates the likelihood of the tropics getting going. If I zoom in on the United States and show you our precipitation pattern, we still see the biggest wild card being the tropics, but note, the models are not currently forecasting in August the risk of drought development. They're keeping it warm, but not talking about the risk of drought redevelopment here. The CPC agrees. It's got heat, a lot of this being warm overnight lows with daytime highs clearly getting into the mid to upper 90s. But the moisture profile is in place around the Bermuda high, keeping the risk of drought development away. That's, like I said, the farther west you go, I think the greater the risk of that drought development coming into play. So where do we take all of this? Let's talk about the hurricane season first, then we'll stretch this out into that fall and eventually winter forecast. Right now, if we look zoomed in here, the ocean temperatures in the western Atlantic, the Caribbean, and the Gulf are warm enough to support Cat 5 hurricanes. So they're already there. They could do that. But you got to have the wind shear calm down. You have to have the dry, dusty air out of the picture. In order to get a massive hurricane, it's not just ocean temperatures, it's other things. But we are expecting, because of the development of La Nina, which is trying to get going, for these wind shear issues to go away in the Atlantic. And take note of the cooler water here. This is a part of a setup for the Atlantic called the positive phase of the Atlantic meridional mode. And that is one other feature that says that this whole region has better and better chances of dropping the pressure and developing tropical systems. Now, where are we? You are here. There's 90 days of tropical activity still to come, with the peak some point in mid-September. So we're going to have this discussion on repeat over the coming months as to our risk of tropical development. The Bermuda high being key. If the Bermuda high stays in place, I will likely be able to forecast well for you that our wind shear profile will stay below its historical averages, which is where I just drew that black line. Now, if you're unfamiliar with what this means, wind shear is the change of wind speed and direction with height. Years where the hurricanes are sheared apart and they never survive their way into the southeast, the blue line, which is what's observed, is way up here. Years where we have very active hurricane season, we tend to have the blue line being down here, indicating lower than average wind shear. Now, with all of that, let's also look at the other component to this, and that is what's going on with La Nina. When La Ninas build and the trade winds get going fast, the wind shear drops in this area, and the ocean temperatures are already warm. So is La Nina building? Well, we're currently seeing a pretty significant drop in ocean temperatures to finish the month of July. We're almost down there into weak La Nina territory. But we're not yet settled onto whether or not the atmosphere is fully behaving like that. And I want to show you what would typically happen in September, October, November if it did. So what I've pulled up for you here, let's blow this up so you can see a bit better. This is what typically happens with temperatures in fall with La Nina. It's not much. There's not actually that strong of a correlation. Maybe we're a little bit cooler than average here, a little bit warmer than average there. You're going, wait a minute, those are blues and these are the warmer. I know, this is a correlation map. The blues represent a correlation such that when there's a La Nina, it's warmer here. Maybe slightly cooler there. But what about precip? Now again, this is September, October, November. If we go have a look at it, there we go. If it was El Nino, we'd likely dip into a wetter fall after the hurricane season. But possibly we spread drier conditions in here after the hurricane season. But the hurricane season could be the dominant factor keeping this area wetter going forward. So what do we do with all of that? Well, we have to ask, how strong of a La Nina are we looking at? Some of the evidence I've got from the Bureau of Meteorology, which is out of Australia, they're actually calling for INSO neutral. Their forecast, which is seen here on this graphic, is very similar to the Europeans. So we're going to compare the Australians to the Canadians, to the Europeans, to the Japanese, to the French, to the United States, and to the British. And from August to September, October, November, and December, what did we see? The Bureau of Meteorology and the Europeans not aggressively calling for La Nina development, but NOAA is. And we need to talk about that because NOAA's official forecast is for an 80% chance of having La Nina dominate things. But this forecast, which is provided by the CPC, includes human intuition and human forecasters and human experience and wisdom in it. The modeling suggests that it's not yet clear. You see the gray bar versus the blue bar. The gray bar is neutral. The blue bar is the La Nina being forecast by the models. And it's not as strong as the humans are forecasting. So what do we do with all of this? Well, I'm going to show you the resulting model forecast from it. And what you've got here is from the Climate Prediction Center. We're going to look at one other model after this. The Climate Prediction Center is suggesting August, September, October, wetter. What about September, October, November? See the dryness coming in? This is October, November, December, really starting to get dry in the southern plains. And then as we go out there to November, December, January, that dryness is spreading into South Ag Carolina territory. December, January, February, this is La Nina to the T. So we have the flow coming in and out of the country like that with very weak subtropical flow, which is why this whole region looks to be drier because of their aggressive forecast of La Nina. Now remember, this is what happens in a forecast if La Nina dominates. If it doesn't, this never manifests itself quite like this. Let's look at one other modeling group here. This is the September, October, November outlook for precipitation from the IRI multi-model probability forecast system. See how it's got the drier risks here. Temperature-wise, mild fall. That's what it's calling for. In fact, out there to October, November, December, quite mild in the fall according to the model. But the precip side, it's trying to bring in drier conditions overall, even into the beginning of winter. And that's one of the things we're going to have to be concerned about going forward. So now we've seen August, we've stretched this out through fall and into winter with the drier risks in place after the hurricane season, knowing that the hurricane season is the biggest wild card. None of this matters if we get active hurricanes late into September and October that hit the southeast, which this year is a possibility. But there is one other part of the world I want to address before we wrap this up, and it's South America. So I made a couple of slides here for a group of Brazilians I was talking to. And if we look at those things, the warm ocean temperatures in the Atlantic and the development of La Nina, that's these two factors, historically La Ninas tend to correlate with a drier start to the growing season in southern Brazil and to Argentina, with wet conditions in the Amazon. But if the Atlantic dominates, it just tends to be drier across broader areas. A slow start to things. And some of the models are calling for that. Now at this point, I look at this and I am not, let me repeat this, I am not seeing major problems for Brazil yet. But they can start planting in a month if they want to. They can start at the very beginning of September. And the European model, which is shown here, is drier to the north but wetter over about 70% of the growing area in Brazil. And if this manifests itself as shown over here in the model for September, October, November, I am not right now predicting any major problems for Brazil. And even some of the longer term forecasts through the heart of their first crop of soybeans is saying that if there's trouble, it's down into Argentina that we have to be on the lookout for. That's what the European model is suggesting. So unfortunately, right now, if we're looking for any sort of a spark in the markets due to potential problems in South America, the forecasts right now are not aggressively dry enough to give us the confidence to say there's going to be issues there. But all of this will be things that I'll monitor. And when we talk again at the end of August, we'll be looking at that critical month of September, which is critical for South America and the North American hurricane season. And we'll have a better idea as to how drought's going to develop, and we'll update all of these forecasts through winter and get a better look. So I appreciate it. We'll talk to you again then. Thanks.